intimate there.
You're listening to Head South Radio with your host, Cat Meyer, a podcast dedicated to prioritizing pleasure and removing the stigma and shame around sex. We're here to be curious and have an open conversation about sexual health and relational wellness. This podcast is intended for educational and entertainment purposes. The information discussed is not a substitute for professional medical advice.
Hi everyone, I'm your host, Cat Meyer. Our guest on this episode is Dr. Antonette Whitehead, an OBGYN at Downtown Women's Health in Lower Manhattan. Dr. Whitehead was my former gynecologist, and I can say with so much gratitude that she was one of the first healthcare providers who made me feel seen and heard. She validated my concerns and worked with me to find solutions to the reproductive health issues I was facing at the time. She was also open to working in tandem with my primary care physician, Chinese medicine practitioner, and naturopathic doctor. I felt truly lucky and supported to have Antonette on my care team. Today, Antonette and I discuss queer family planning and what considerations queer people and partners need to make during this stage in their lives. While all family building requires some planning, queer people or alternative relationship styles or people pursuing co-parenting agreements may need to make additional considerations compared to their heterosexual cis-gender counterparts when they are planning their family. Please take a moment to leave a review and a rating wherever you listen to podcasts to help us grow. We appreciate your support, and if this episode resonates with you or you know someone who may want to listen, please share it with them and on your social media channels. I hope you enjoy this episode. Just a quick technical note, there was some sound issues on Antonette's end. This might have been due to her mic or the space that she was recording in. We had noticed this while we were recording and had paused our interview to try and troubleshoot the sound, which did make some improvements, as well as in post-production, our brilliant editor, Megan, did everything she could to help improve the sound quality. We just wanted to make this a note in advance of listening to this episode because you will notice a difference in the sound of my recording to Antonette's. Dr. Antonette Whitehead, I'm so glad you're here joining us for Head South Radio. I would love if you could take a moment to introduce yourself and where you live, what you do, and any personal information you'd like to disclose as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here, and we made this work. So I'm Antonette Whitehead. I am a native Midwesterner, now New Yorker. It was always my dream to come here. I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan. All my family hails from the Midwest, but I was the one who wanted to branch out. And apparently it was my dream. I don't remember having this conversation, but at the tender age of 18, I would tell all of my family members and, my parents would have dinner parties, and I told them I will go to New York City and raise my family. And that was it. So here I am. I am an OBGYN at Downtown Women, which is a wonderful reproductive health practice located in Soho. I've been here, I will start year 13 in August, which has been wonderful. This was my first job out of residency, and I have not budged yet, so that's been amazing. We're a wonderful group that just really trying to provide inclusive care to people of New York City. And so we take care of people if they are pregnant, non-pregnant, my youngest patient, I'm now starting to see some of, my patient's children, which is really awesome. So, from age 16 all the way through, changes of life, and we're seeing people into their 60s, 70s, and 80s, which is wonderful. So really providing long-term continuity. I'm a mom of one spicy little wonderful girl. My daughter's name is Amber. We live in downtown Brooklyn. We are a party of three. So myself, my wife Candace, my daughter Amber. And yes, that's a little bit about me and my family. And when I'm not providing support and care to other people, I can be found on the dance floor or in a dance class.
What kind of dance do you do?
So now my love is like West African, Afro-Haitian. I still dabble a little bit in salsa, so that was kind of my passion in college. Actually, one of my very best friends taught me, and then I joined a group and started teaching myself. So I would say those are the biggest kind. But it's been a little interesting with the pandemic. A lot of Zoom classes, and hoping to jump back into things now that things are a little bit more relaxed. I actually had it down to like a pretty good science when my daughter, she was in a dance class. I could drop her, scurry to my own class, and then scurry back to get her. But then, of course, that was like February of 2020. But yes, I would say my love is anything like African based. And then I also still really enjoy salsa dancing as well.
Oh, amazing. So that leads us into a few icebreakers. What is your astrological sign, and do you identify with those traits often associated with your sign?
That's an awesome question. I am an Aries, so my birthday is April 5th. I think the characteristic that I identify most with is just that we are headstrong, but it's very much in a good way. So when we love hard. When we work, our work ethic is definitely strong in there. When we want to pursue something or we have a life goal, but perhaps maybe my family members, my wife have different thoughts on that, if that's a good quality or not. But I think that's the best thing about us.
I've been lucky enough to have some special Aries in my life, and I do have to say that, well, you're a fire sign.
Yes.
You're very supportive. I think people take some of the headstrongness as like bullishness in a way, or like forcefulness or aggressiveness or assertiveness. But oftentimes it sometimes helps. I'm a water sign, I'm a Cancer, so it helps with like pushing us forward in a way that is like what we need. So I think for compatibility, it's nice for more watery, softer, and airy air signs to have some airy, some fiery people in their life who kind of can help them set up like more of a backbone, more of like a drive. You guys are really driven people, and so
Yeah, absolutely. So then you have a birthday coming up?
I do in July. So I'm right at the cusp. So I'm a Cancer with Leo rising and an Aries moon. It all works together.
Yes, it does. It comes together somehow.
What's your comfort movie or TV show?
This is hard because I feel like what I've watched over time has really changed. And I think that happens as you become a parent, very much into animation and such. But I have to say, and it's very funny because I remember finding myself on the couch watching this a lot when I was pregnant. Somehow it was always on, but I really love Twilight. And I know that people have things to say about that, but I feel like that was my go-to movie before. And I enjoyed reading the actual books. And then especially when I was pregnant, I would find myself at home, like, I'll sit on the couch. So I love the Twilight series, but TV shows, I don't feel like I have as many. I kind of gravitate towards what my wife watches. We really are into like horror movie genre, like Halloween. So I guess American Horror Story. That was like, yes, it's a little intense, but if you met my wife, it would make perfect sense. So at some point we have to have you meet her. But yes, I guess the TV, I kind of watch what she watches.
Mm-hmm. It's sometimes easier to like relinquish that to a partner. And then you
Yes,
just kind of like, I don't even have the energy to think about what program to watch or what to choose. You decide, and I'll kind of just tune in and tune out.
agreed,
Yeah.
agreed.
It's funny because I just was having this conversation with my partner about like, we're not horror fans. And I've had partners who were horror fans. So I have an appreciation for like the original Psycho or American Werewolf, like old classic, but from like a film and cinema perspective. But anything that's like scary torture. I did watch the first season of American Horror, and I thought like it's same thing. It's like an incredible story. It's like really captivating, but the scary parts were just too scary for me. So I'm not a fan of that genre, but I can appreciate certain works within that genre and be like, yes, it's really enjoyable, and there's such a really cool, scary, terrifying story. But anything like torturous or anything that feels like a little too real or a little too close to home,
Right.
I
So
can't.
I feel like that series has all of those components wrapped together into one, and it can be very intense for people. So yes, there were definitely some episodes I excused myself. And some of them, like I feel like the biggest one I feel like most people gravitate towards was the Coven with the witches, and everyone loved that part. But there were definitely some times where I was like, okay, I'm just gonna
This isn't for
mosey on
me.
over here. Yes.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it's nice just to veg and let your partner take over. But I agree. I can understand.
Mhm. What's the best trip you've ever taken?
I think I'm going to go with Brazil, which is interesting because that was just last July. I think there was this great anticipation for it just because it was something that we booked for 2020, and because of COVID, it got pushed off. But it was just a beautiful country and beautiful people and wonderful food. And I don't know, there was this like sense of feeling at home. And then also just a sense of kind of fulfilling what I wanted for my child and watching her grow and being able to see the world and seeing how excited she was to be there, because now I feel like she's at an age where she really can take things in. So I would vote Brazil. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds lovely. It's so nice to witness children experiencing travel and experiencing different cultures. And so then this comes to a question that I try to ask most of my guests, if not all of them. What was sex education like for you?
I would say very limited, very discreet. I grew up going to school, a small private school, actually Catholic school in the suburbs of Detroit. So I feel like a lot of things were very black and white as they were at that time and glossed over. Trying to give people a small amount of information, but not too much detail. But I don't know that it was actually very educated in a sense. I think I have a different perspective as well too, being a reproductive health provider and then now having my own child. And I'm interested to see as she goes through school what that looks like for her. But I definitely think there were some healthy discussions going on at home about your body and how it evolves and changes and, you know, what does that mean for you? And as you choose, a partner and potentially being intimate. So I felt like where things are very kind of quiet and kind of tucked in away in a corner at school, I think, my parents did a great job of like filling things in at home. So there was some healthy discussion at home for sure.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. I went to a Catholic school, so my first sex ed in 6th grade was in a Catholic school setting, and they separated us into rooms. We watched the video based on your gender, and then I went to a public high school, and it was definitely in 9th, 10th grade, it was more preventative information. So I would say it definitely wasn't comprehensive, it wasn't inclusive, and it definitely didn't include emotion or experience or anything that would actually prepare humans to engage in any sex or relational well-being. And so yeah, I that was my education, but I was lucky enough to have a mother who communicated these things. I understood. She took me when I first got my period just to meet an OBGYN and talk. And then when I was ready to have sex, she took me to the gynecologist. Like I told her I was ready to have sex in the next few months. I could see it happening. And so she took me to the gynecologist and we like laid out a plan of like all the different options for birth control. And so I had a full understanding, and that was through my mother, definitely not through school.
No, of course. But I think that's wonderful that your mom did that. I actually, always get the question, when is a good time for my child to start coming to you and asking questions? And I think it's nice to introduce it earlier, because I think by the time, you start to get more into a discussion of topics, people just feel more comfortable because you've created that space. And especially when it goes down the road to doing exams and pelvic exams, it's being in that environment. Maybe you're not getting an exam, but you've sat and talked to this person a few times already and created that bond and safe space. So that's great.
Yeah, I remember I have very clear memories of going with her when I was both 4 and 8 to the OBGYN when she was pregnant with my younger siblings. And I remember making her a card after she gave birth to my sister, and I drew the fetus that I saw at the OBGYN because I thought that's what my sister was going to look like. And I
Oh,
made my mom a card. I just had that very clear visual memory of doing that for her. But I appreciated there was times where it was a little traumatic, and I wish there was more conversation around some of the things in that experience, but I also appreciated that my mom would bring me along to these things and witness the conversation. And I remember sitting in the doctor's office through my mom's pregnancies as well as just going to speak to the doctor, and so just being familiar with this person. And so then when it came time to actually have a pelvic floor exam, to have that experience, I felt comfortable in that office and with those people.
And I also think that some parents kind of are shy about it because they feel like, oh, if I'm bringing my child here, that automatically means, are we giving them ideas or introduce? And I don't think that's the case. I think it's just about supporting your child and giving them, it also feels a little adult at some point too. Like, parents come in, we chat, and then we'll have a separate chat together just to make sure that, they start getting comfortable. Also, it's not just the space, but having a voice and being able to say things about their body. And the earlier you start that, I think the better.
Yeah, empowering.
Yeah. I mean, even my pediatrician now always asks, like, my daughter, is there anything you want to talk about without your parents here? And sometimes, we start to get shuffled out of the room already, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, that's actually really amazing to have that for your daughter, to be able for her to find her voice, because I think there is often like experience of being in the doctor's office and you just keep looking to your parents, but then like they might not know your body and your experience. They might know some of your symptoms, but there might be other things that you're like, actually, or like not comfortable answering in front of your parents. So that's a really nice practice. Speaking of which, how does your personal identity influence your work and your practice?
I think, sitting in a patient seat is always very difficult, I think, no matter who you are. I think as our world tries to become more inclusive, whether that it's in the realm of gender or what do you identify in terms of ethnicity and background, I really take that with me now more than ever before, just because just empathizing as a woman of color, as a queer woman, just the societal barriers that are there from day to day. And I think it really becomes more present in the realm of medicine. And so I think as we start to recognize these things more as a provider, it's just simple things like, what are your preferred pronouns? Like, how do you like to be addressed? I mean, small things I think really help people. And again, it's about creating that space so people, the more safety there is and comfort there is, the more likely that patients are able to disclose. Being a reproductive provider, it's a very personal realm. And you have 2 minutes to make that exam and think that's very intimate. You have a short amount of time to make people feel comfortable. So I think just small things in terms of, language, like how you're referring to, the body. You don't always have to say the uterus or things, like you can say the pelvis or, just to be able to talk to people and the language that feels comfortable to them and how they see themselves. So I think I take all of those things, and just also from the perspective of being an African American woman and traditional racist things that have happened in the realm of medicine, and the very, very stark things that have been done to us as a community, and really making sure people are feeling heard because they haven't been heard before in the past. And so across the board, I try to take that with me in each room I go into, no matter who I'm seeing. And, just in the realm of women, I mean, making sure that people feel like, again, there's a safe space and everyone's voice is being heard if they're, it's painful periods or I have heavy periods, and not just saying, oh, that's normal, that's normal, that's normal. Well, it may be, but let's talk through it and make sure that it is, and people are getting their thoughts out to you. So I think I take that with me even more so now. And I even sometimes think about, like, I'm like, oh, I hope when my daughter, as she goes through life, like she has providers like this too, that really take a moment to listen and let people have a voice.
Yeah. I mean, you were my provider. That's how we met. And it was after a very frustrating period of my life where I was being met with a lot of medical gaslighting and being told it's fine, or being put on birth control when I didn't want to be on birth control, and being told that's the only solution for a lot of some of the issues I was experiencing. And so you were the first provider. I can't even remember. I think I just Googled downtown. Like I was Googling gynecologist, like trying to find someone. And I had at that point had predominantly only had male gynecologists, and I just felt like they weren't listening to me. They kept telling me things were normal or this was fine or giving me antibiotics. And it was just like this pendulum swinging back and forth of issues constantly. And so then when I Googled gynecologist downtown, I found Downtown Women's Health. I found you. I came in and I do remember that like very clearly. You listened and I explained like I would love to take some holistic approaches here. I'd love to work with my other care providers. You had recommended a dermatologist who was also based in Soho, who was also helpful because there was like some skin irritation. And instead of just putting me on another antibiotic, it was like, no, you might actually, it might not be a thing. It might be this thing. And so it's better to go to this dermatologist to see if it's just whatever. I can't even remember what it was, but it was just so nice to be heard and to take a different approach or to be able to share what I was looking towards. And then it made me feel more open to like, oh, if this is like what you recommend and this is the path we need to go down, then I felt like I could trust you more because you actually did hear me and kind of work with me rather than like dismiss me as like, you don't know anything. So I truly appreciate that your sensitivity, and that really meant a lot to me. It was a huge shift in my life in how I experienced healthcare and interacted with healthcare providers. And then you were very supportive of like including my Chinese medicine practitioner and my naturopath into the conversation as well, and kind of helping me with a holistic approach to my body. And so thank you. You truly are a provider that really does listen and validates your patients. I can speak to that.
Thank you, Kat. I have to say, and I think now residency medical school is more attuned to trying to bring the two worlds together in terms of providing more holistic care. And I just think it's nice. But I'll tell you, like, I really didn't learn that until coming into practice and practicing here, in New York City at Downtown Women. I just think it's been a legacy of providers that have tried to keep that going, and just learning from them and their approach, has been so helpful. But I think the wonderful thing is now, speaking with residents and medical students, I feel like that's being incorporated more and more into kind of like our basic education and earlier, which I think is really significant.
And I'm seeing more too. There's definitely a movement of, I don't know if you're familiar with, I can't recall his name right now, but there's an illustrator, a medical illustrator who illustrates all of the medical illustrations, but with people of color, and showing like, oh yeah, I've never seen baby in the womb that was a black baby, or, like a different race other than white. And so this illustrator is posting those on Instagram, and it's actually creating this movement of inclusivity in all walks of medical care. And so the example shouldn't just be cisgendered white men. It's representation and showing all of the different illustrations, imagery, studies of all humans and all bodies, which is really cool to be witnessing actually in more recent years.
No, definitely. I feel like there's still a lot of work to be done, but I definitely think we're making progress, which is wonderful to see.
So we had a pre-conversation before this podcast recording, and one of the things that I was wanting to hone in on is queer family planning and building a family when you're either a mixed orientation couple or a same-sex couple. So can you explain the various family planning options available for queer individuals and couples?
I think, where I at least start my patients, or if they're a single parent by choice, deciding like, what does family building look like for us? Am I going to be the one that, is carrying the pregnancy? Is it my partner? Would we want to think about, some families do a beautiful job of like blending themselves together, and some people have their like eggs harvested and make embryos, and then their, partner carries. Some people decide to carry at the same time. I mean, people really do some wonderful things, but I think where, we can step in and be helpful is kind of talking about the different options. And would that be in the setting of, do we think about like at home insemination and, tracking the cycle and doing things in the comfort of the home? Do we think people would be better kind of served if they would think about insemination in our office? Like for our office, I think we offer a little bit of a middle of the road option where it's not necessarily as many medications, so kind of like a natural cycle insemination. And then it kind of flows into working with a fertility specialist. Like, would we think that someone may benefit from medications that may help kind of close the ovulation window where we think the egg is being released, and a combination of insemination with that? Or I would say the other is thinking about like IVF. And then I would also talk about surrogacy in terms of couples. There are medical conditions where a person can't carry. Is it two males that are married and one a family? The beautiful thing about the queer community is that our families are so same but different, but knowing all the options. And so I would also say, like, thinking about like working and the realm of working with someone as a surrogate carrier as well too.
And so, from what you've witnessed, how does that process differ for queer individuals and couples compared to like heterosexual couples when it comes to family building?
I think across the board, there's planning that's involved. But I do think like as a queer person in our families, there's a little bit more that comes into play. I think, what I've seen some of my patients and some of my couples kind of grapple with is if we do a known versus an anonymous donor in terms of a sperm donation, what does that look like for us? It's very interesting. Sometimes we find, depending on who they work with, there are not as many like BIPOC donors, or there seems to be lacking in different aspects. So people, in terms of building their family, have to decide, is it kind of the genotype or genetics and traditionally kind of ethnicity and background that I want to stick to? Or our thought was, oh my gosh, with picking a donor, wow, this person looked just like my wife. So it's really interesting. It looked like her, or they provide actually pictures of donors and some information and background about ethnicity, medical history, and not to be too personal, we used an anonymous donor. We went through a sperm donation bank, and depending on how much information you want to learn about them, they can even hear like a live interview about them talking through things. So there's a lot of information for people to help people decide. But I think the struggles sometimes is the planning and in terms of what you want your family to look like, what donors are available in terms of sperm donation, how you would want to do it. The other thing sometimes with known donors, especially in New York City, I'm just knowing that things take time. So what some of my couples or patients have become frustrated with is that if they have a known donor and they are working, not doing at-home insemination, but maybe they're doing insemination with a fertility specialist or IVF with a fertility specialist, that there is this what they call quarantine time. So timing where they kind of set aside for the donor to be able to be tested, whether that's for genetics or STIs or things. But I think people sometimes they think about their timeline and they say, okay, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to start the family build and to conceive, but not knowing that sometimes there's a little bit other logistical things that we have to move through. So I really encourage my patients to start thinking if they have a time, if they have a timeline, maybe they want to start trying at the end of 2023. But because there can be sometimes other logistical things that we have to move through, maybe, okay, if they say December 2023, maybe you start having conversations or doing research or looking for donors, maybe 3 to 6 months. I would say on the shorter end, like 3 months, but like 6 months beforehand, just to know what's there, what your options are. Do we think about looking at tests or there's no necessarily kind of quote unquote fertility test, but can we get an idea of how the reproductive tract is functioning? And, would you be best served at home, or do we feel like we need to consult a fertility specialist for some people? I think it's a combination between the medicine, but also personal choice as well. So I think the biggest thing is it's a little bit more planning, but doable. And starting, getting a jump on things, trying to decide what your family building looks like can be very helpful, just because there are kind of like these pockets of sometimes can be waiting or, getting blood work done in terms of testing.
There's some process that comes with it. So just to clarify, when it's a known donor, that means perhaps like a couple seeks out somebody, a friend, a family member, someone in their world to be the donor. Same thing with a surrogate, or you can have anonymous or someone carry that you don't actually know, or a donor that you don't actually know. So those, just for a
Correct.
little clarity of that.
Correct.
So that would lead to my next question is, are there legal considerations or challenges with queer individuals or couple dynamics? Maybe a polyamorous couple, or maybe it's 3 or 4 people who have decided to co-parent together and raise a child or children together and kind of do like the way a divorced couple would, with like shared custody and work in that way. But there's obviously some legalities and, are you familiar with any of those rights or some of those things that couples might want to consider when making these types of decisions?
I think that, what I've experienced, I think that there are some people that have kind of just verbal agreement with the donor that they know. There's other people that actually legal things do come into play. And I think it's not necessarily a negative thing. I think everyone wants to make sure that their family is protected, and remains how they want it to be in the future. And so that some couples have, signed a legal agreement with like their known donor. We've had a few families that are polyamorous, which I have to say, just to say in terms of where we work out of and the hospital and here, I've just been so happy to say that those families have been had a wonderful pregnancy and birth experience in terms of recognizing that our families are different. I really have been happy that a lot of families that we've worked with that are polyamorous have been nervous about just birth experience, hospital experience, office experience, and everyone that we've taken care of has been so loved and welcomed. And I just think that's great in terms of like our team. So I just wanted to kind of toot our own horn. But I do think that there have been families that have also kind of set, things in the standard agreement with legal things as well. So whether they've been also like polyamorous or, people always ask me, did your wife adopt your daughter? I think it's kind of, again, it's a personal choice in terms of your family and your family unit, whether you include that legal component or not. But again, I think it's just, in terms of people trying to protect their families. So I think that's a valid point in terms of thinking about like the process and family building, that there are legal things that also may come in for implication as well. And I think in the realm of surrogacy, I think, there's also agreements that come between, the couple and the surrogate as well that you have to think about.
Because I believe a lot of the system is structured around heteronormative
It
relationship
is.
and mom,
Absolutely.
dad, baby. And that's how the system is structured. That's how the medical system is structured. That's how the legal system is structured often, or it sways or leans more in that versus the consideration of alternatives of any kind or marginalized relationship structures, dynamics, all of those things aren't as considered. And so it's important for couples to kind of keep that in mind when they're doing this, that there is, to your point, like there is a lot of extra planning or considerations. And the thing is, like, if you have a vision of what your family structure could look like, and then those things can change. And depending on where you live, what state, what country, some of those dynamics can easily fall apart in the eyes of the court. And so if you, your partner, or partners have a vision of what this family structure looks like and how it can evolve over time as your child gets older as well, and making considerations of like if your child wants to meet the known donor, or does the known donor want to have a relationship with that child, and what does that look like? And to then that next consideration is the psychological aspects, the support, the mental health around that process as a queer couple or parents are planning, but then also through, the lifetime of their child. What are some considerations they should be making or thinking about?
I think about like my daughter and as she grows and develops, it also is Pride Month. But I think that's important in terms of always being proud. And from day one, it's kind of been instilled in her. No offense, dads, but you don't necessarily need to have a dad, it's interesting. My wife calls herself Maddie, which was mommy daddy. And that has really stuck. And interesting enough, we went to a bookstore and someone actually wrote a book now called I Am Maddie, which I loved. I told her, I was like, you were too late. We should have done this. No, but it's wonderful because we kind of instilled in her, you don't necessarily need a male figure. And I mean, there are people in your life, but families are built in different ways. I think it's wonderful now that we have, the conversation at home. And even as a 3-year-old, I remember dropping her off at preschool and she looked over and her friend said, yeah, dad's, I think there was like a Parents' Day celebration, but it was right around like Father's Day when school was, ending. And, my daughter was like, but yeah, you don't necessarily need a dad. And her little friend said, no, you're right. Like moms or parents can do the same. It's wonderful to see. I think that the younger generations are getting it, which also makes me feel then people who are my age and older should get it too. But anyways, that's another podcast. But I think that from day one, it's just the support and being proud of your family and saying this is normal and this is who we are. And we may not look like other families, and they don't look like us. And that's the beautiful thing about life, is that there's diversity, and really, really talking about that and being inclusive. I think we're very lucky to live in our New York City bubble. It's a wonderful place to be, but that's the only thing I can say is just that we've really tried to instill in her that this is our family. We are loved. We are normal. You can have so many different types and it's okay. Because, there's been statements to me that, she's definitely going to have concerns in the future or issues. But I'm like, so you're telling me because she doesn't have a father, what about like single moms or grandparents or aunts and uncles that, maybe assume care of, maybe their niece or nephew? I don't know. Society can be sometimes so focused on the norm and the heteronormative, like you said, the core family. But I think we just really try to instill from like a young age that this is normal. Families can be anything, and that's okay. And I think she's really cognizant of that. She said, she goes, I don't need a dad because I feel like we get more stuff done, the two of you. And I was like, thank you. Appreciate you, Amber. I'm glad you're recognizing that. But no, that's all I can say is being proud and having those conversations, starting them when they're young. Those are my thoughts on the parent aspect.
And those moments might come up where she is curious. It's a beautiful thing because that is a very common way in which kids experience shame, let's say, or misunderstanding, because another kid asks them, well, where's your daddy? Or where's your this ... or why are you like this? Or why are you eating that? Or whatever it is, that's where it forms. And what's important is that your daughter has the foundation and the understanding of the relationship dynamic and her benefit of having two mommies or parents, and not having a dad doesn't feel like a deficit, like something she's lost out on in her experience as a human. And I think more stories, more families, more different dynamics, and exactly that. Like there's guardians, there's grandparents, there's aunts and uncles, there's different people in children's lives who represent so much. And so we need to kind of honor those and celebrate those relationships. So it's not so mommy, daddy, baby, and that's it. And that's normal, and everything else is weird or bad, or you're losing something, because it's not. Even within that structure of mommy, daddy, baby, there's stuff there. There's things that create insecurity there. There's things that feel wrong or different, because everyone is human and experiencing those things. But to have more books and media that are supporting very different dynamics, very different orientations, very different representation than what has been normally shared is so important. And it's why this generation is so comfortable and is so comfortable with their sexuality, with their way of being. Like witnessing Gen Z and their experience with the world is so incredible. I find them very inspiring. Like people kind of talk shit on them a little bit, like millennials and Gen Xers and boomers all talk shit on the younger generations. But to me, one of the more inspiring generations is Gen Z, because they are so, I feel that they're so grounded in themselves and so like open to being fully themselves and accepting one another, like witnessing teenagers right now and how they interact with each other. Yes, they're normal teenagers, hormonal and sometimes crazy, but how they're interacting and expressing themselves is so inspiring. That's going to wrap up our conversation. I appreciate so much you taking the time out of your day and taking the opportunity, because I know you had a cancellation in your schedule. So that was I really appreciate that. Is there anything we didn't touch on that you wanted to share before we sign off?
I don't think so. I think thank you for having me, and also for your time and just dedication to these topics, which again, it's great that we're getting more discussion and perspectives for people. It's very, very important. I don't think so. It was great. Thank you.
And Dr. Whitehead, how do people find you and Downtown Women's Health?
So, of course, we have the old school website, downtownwomen.com. And then we are on social media. Also, a lot of people, I feel like, feel Facebook is old school as well. And we are on DTW OBGYN. Facebook and on Insta. See, it's happening.
Perfect timing.
I was like right at I was like, oh, thank goodness it's been so quiet in Soho. But if anyone wants or is in need of inclusive care, we're here. We are also on ZocDoc for appointments if people are interested or need a good reproductive health provider. But yeah, and we're located on Prince and Broadway in Soho.
Very conveniently located in Soho. It's very accessible to get to.
Yes, come see us and then go shopping or enjoy the lower part of the city.
Thank you so much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and have a really lovely summer.
Thank
We'll talk soon.
Okay, sounds great.
Thank you. Special thanks to all of our guests. Head South is hosted by Cat Meyer, produced by Isis Barlow, edited by Megan Hook, with music by Lily Rezi Rothman, graphics by Ella Chodos Irvine, cover art by Gina Ship Casey, and intro by Murph Meyer.
If you're looking for me, I'm heading south. All year round, I'm going down. Now you know where I'll be, I'm heading south. So come on, look me right in the